South Asia and Art Forum SF welcomes you to the 5th edition of the South Asian Literature and Arts Festival 2024, popularly known as SALA. Thank you for coming and being a part of this festival. Before we begin, a big thank you to all our sponsors who have enabled us to bring this quality of a festival to the Bay Area community. You should be able to see them on the screen, but we're experiencing a little bit of a glitch. Today's talk is Fault Lines. It's a panel on partition by Anurag Wadehra, Manreet Someshwar, and Saadia Faruqi. They're in conversation with Vinita Sud Belani. Vinita Sud Belani, a little bit about her, is the founding artistic director of EnActe Arts. It's a theater company located in Houston and the Silicon Valley. Vinita is an actor, director, producer, and has directed many plays, including The Case of the Vanishing Firefish, which she also co-wrote. Vinita is trained in street theater and under the renowned director and playwright Badal Sarkar. Just a few house rules before we begin. You want to keep your cell phones on silent, and I request you not to record any videos during the lecture. There'll be a 15 minutes question and answer session after the discussion, and books will be available for sale and signing outside in the atrium in the front lawn. We'll have a book signing by Manreet Someshwar, and we already have signed copies by Yasmin. Great, let's begin.
Thank you everyone for being here. I'm going to start this very difficult panel. Difficult on two levels. A, because any panel that follows a Salima panel is by definition very difficult. And fault lines are difficult to talk about. They trigger all kinds of emotions in all of us. And so this will be an emotional conversation. I want to start the conversation with a little couplet that Manreet chose for one of her books in her trilogy. Is mulk di vand kolo yaro, khoye tusi bhi ho, khoye assi bhi hain. Lali akhan di pai, lali akhan di pai dasti hai, roye tusi bhi ho, roye assi bhi hain. For those of you who didn't get it, with the partition of this land, friends, you lost, as did we. The redness of eyes chronicles you wept, as did we. Nobody won. I want to start with introducing our three panelists. Saadia Faruqi, who is a Houston-based Pakistani American playwright. I stand corrected. Writer and interfaith activist, which is a very interesting combination that I'm very interested to get into. Her book on partition is The Partition Project. It's a young adult novel, which, if you haven't read, I highly, highly recommend. Yeah. Next to her is Manreet Sodhi Someshwar. It's a triple name for a triple effect. This is her trilogy on partition. As you can see, I had a lot of homework to do. Manreet is a New York-based writer who we'll learn more about her as I talk to her, that her bio is way too long. And then last but not least is our own very own Bay Area partition specialist, Anurag Wadehra, who is known to all of us in the corporate world, and as a co-playwright of a play on partition that we actually did together. So, no pressure here. The great Salima has arrived. हम आप ही की बात कर रहे थे. Saadia, to start with you. There is so much curiosity in my mind on so many levels. A, you wrote a book, you're living in Houston and you wrote a book about something very South Asian. B, it's a book that is not for adults but for young adults. And C, you in your own website say that you are a writer and an interfaith activist. How does all this come about?
Well, the writer has been in me since I first started writing, and like a lot of us who are writers, it's something that's there throughout, whether we want to or not, and certainly not something I ever thought would be a job or a career that I could take up. But it never left me, and I've always been writing. Interfaith work, I started, I came to the US, I was in college, and then 9/11 happened, and the only thing I really had to, we started as a country demonizing a whole group of people, not just Muslims, but anybody who looked Muslim, who could be Sikh, who could be Hindu, who could be, I was in Florida at that time, who could be Mexican. There was so much distrust and hate in the days after 9/11, and the only thing I really had was my writing, and so I started doing that more, writing in newspapers, getting people together, having interfaith discussions, and so I did that for, ever since that time. But when my children were old enough to start reading, I realized there were no books that showed, that reflected themselves. They were obviously American, but they did not feel that way because when they picked up a book, it was never them that they saw on the cover. The story was never about somebody like them. Or, the mother in the story was never anybody like me. And so I decided to write one story about a girl that was like my daughter when she was little. And that was the start of my writing career for kids. And now this, I think, is my 48th book. So it's been a long time since I started to get to the point of writing about the real topic of partition, which is how, we're all here.
So I love the construct of the book because this is a very Desi Houston family, and then Dadi comes to live with Desi Houston family, and then the whole house is in a flurry. I love how you bring in another Asian character who's almost envious that Dadi is coming. Can you talk a little bit about the plot and how all that?
Thank you for reminding me about Kim Huang, who is Vietnamese American, who is Maha's best friend. So the story is about Faha, short for Mahnur, who is Pakistani American, lives in Sugar Land, Texas, which if anybody has anybody who lives in Houston, they know Sugar Land is where all the people go to live. And so she's living this great first generation life, just like my kids and many of your kids or you as well. And then Dadi comes to live with them, and she hates it because she has to give up her room, and she has to babysit Dadi because Dadi's alone, and so she's the youngest, and she gets to hang out with Dadi after school. And Dadi is always talking about this thing called partition that Maha's never heard about, but it sounds awful, but also very fascinating because Maha wants to be a journalist when she grows up, and so she starts, without asking for her Dadi's permission, she starts recording her Dadi's stories on her phone camera, and she's planning on doing this documentary for school about the partition, and then it becomes this huge thing where she's interviewing a lot of people, and her friend, who's Vietnamese American, can't understand why she can't just be American. And so it's about what is really your identity if you are a first generation or second generation person of any age living in a country where your history, you don't have a history there. And your elders in your family have a history that's very violent and traumatic, and it seeps into your stories, and it seeps into your background. What does that make you? How does that make you feel? How do you suddenly feel like, where is my actual home, or what is my real history? And so Maha has to not only convince herself of this new reality, but her entire school, because now this is a school project, and the kids don't really want to learn about history of another country that they couldn't care less about. So she has to convince them that learning history, A, is important, which I always struggle to explain to my own children, and also grown-ups, why is history important? But learning history of other countries, learning history of other cultures is important because we all are human and we all make the same mistakes over and over, and how can we learn from those? So all wrapped up in a good story, so you don't feel like you're learning a lesson, but you are.
Isn't that just the best way to explain history, is to wrap it up in a good story? Yeah, speaking of good stories, I want to move on to Manreet. Manreet is one of a club that more and more of us are now belonging to, that she calls failed engineers and I call advanced engineers. This is a club that Anurag and she and I all belong to, engineers with MBAs who have now given up that part of our lives so we can focus on making art. When I was making that transition, I was hesitating, and a very dear friend who I did a lot of theater with said to me, there are lots of engineers in the world. There's only one person crazy enough to start a theater company, so you better just do theater instead. So I want to ask you, when did you make that jump, and who gave you the kick in the proverbial bee to make it all happen?
Thank you for that question. As I said, failed engineer, failed sort of business corporate executive. But really, I'm a writer because of my hometown, which is a small town on the border between India and Pakistan. It's called Firozpur, and the Satluj River is really the boundary line. Now the thing is, during 1947, when Cyril Radcliffe was drawing his line, by the laws of partition, the Muslim majority areas were supposed to go to Pakistan. Firozpur was Muslim majority, but as things turned out, it stayed within India. So if you see the Radcliffe line, it traces a squiggle around Firozpur and goes on. Now Firozpur had always been a small town, but a large garrison town, even in the time of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. So suffice to say that it had been in the shadow of Lahore and Amritsar, and that's how it remained. In fact, my father, who was a lawyer, used to say that people who fled from east to west or west to east, they had like an objective, a mission. We seem to be in stasis, like Janus, the Roman god who looks in two directions, and that's the way the town is even to this day. So my town was full of stories of partition, my own family, and like a good child, you ignore them completely because they're all around you. What would you do with them? And the other thing is that Punjab, in fact, the subcontinent, is a very patriarchal society. But I was born to a family of feminists, both my father and mother, and they were like, you have to grow up and have a career. So that's what I did. I went to engineering, went to business school, had a corporate career in Bombay, which was 1,000 miles. I put that kind of distance between Firozpur and myself, and I thought I was doing pretty well. At least the monthly check would tell me that I was doing okay. And then, blame it on my husband, his work moved us to Singapore, and I took a sabbatical. And I think Singapore could not be more of a contrast to India. All the color is kind of leached out. I love Singapore, but it is a very sterile place. And I had these memories which kept floating. And I thought, well, you know what? I'm a good engineer, MBA. I know how to deal with these things. I'll just put it down in a file, in a Word file, and be done with it. And then I started writing, and I realized that I didn't understand things myself. And to complicate matters, my adolescence coincided with what in India is called by various, the separatist movement, the Khalistan movement, etc., etc. But we saw it very closely because my father, in a border town, was a criminal lawyer. So I had this whole host of issues, and I said, okay, let me just go to the library. Before the age of Google, that's what people did. So I went to the library, and I would pull out these books and slowly sort of add to my own gaps in knowledge. And then the 6-month sabbatical became a year. And then I told my husband that I think I'm going to write a novel. And my husband and I met in business school, and he was aghast. No, you can't sit at home and be doing something like this on your own. You will, I said, no, that's what I want to do. And that started my journey at the turn of the millennium, and I've written 9 books by now, and 5 of them tussle actively with the idea of partition. So I don't know who gave me the kick in the backside. I think I did it to myself.
It was a Word document. We'll blame it on Microsoft Word. God bless Microsoft. There's a few things that strike me about your writing. This series is a trilogy, Lahore, Hyderabad, Kashmir. I just want to show it to everybody because the books are so beautiful. The covers are beautiful. You are talking about 3 very different pain points, Lahore, Hyderabad, and Kashmir. But what struck me in this trilogy is the vastness of the work that you have produced. There are characters who we all recognize, like Mountbatten and Jinnah and Gandhi and Vallabhbhai Patel and little Indu and her son Rajiv and of course the people who shaped history are there in the book. But there's a host of other characters who, and this is I think the hallmark of a really, really good writer, because you don't tell us anything. You constantly show. I mean, the books are packed with dialogue. The books are packed with characters that are fully 3-dimensional. And there are maybe, 40, 50 characters in each book. And different characters, book by book. And I know that you did so much research at the New York Public Library that they made you a fellow there. But other than that, how do you hold this narrative together when the work is so vast and the characters are so many? And I'll talk about the actual work, but tell me about the working process first, please.
Well, thank you, Vinita. I'm glad you think so, but I really don't have a structure that I can lay out. I can just tell you that when I started work on the Partition Trilogy, which in a sense I can trace back to starting my writing career, for trying to understand what had happened. And I remember I was struggling, and my husband told me that, well, go start talking to your family first, because they had seen it firsthand. And my mother was already aghast that I had quit my career, and she was like, why do you want to know these things? And that was a question that came up again and again. The trauma is so extensive, it's so deep, so widespread that the only thing people could really do was to put it behind them and look forward. But I was the generation after that, and I had questions of my own. And suffice to say, I started my own oral archive by recording first in my family, then extending it to my neighbors, and then to my hometown and getting their archives. And I had no idea what I would do with all of that. I had no sense. See, I'm not a trained writer. I had to teach myself to write, especially a novel, a historical fiction novel. And that book came out.
I'm just going to interrupt to say, if any of you in the room want to write, go for it. Because for a non-trained writer, she has done a phenomenal job. Be inspired, please.
Yeah, so anyway, to cut a long story short, I wrote two books before this, which dealt with partition in 1984. But I felt there was something missing because I travel to India very frequently, both because we have family there and I never wanted my daughters to feel, who's grown up outside of India, that she's not Indian enough. And there was this WhatsApp university where these messages keep coming that if Patel had been the Prime Minister, XYZ would have happened. And because I had spent so much time in the trenches, I thought I needed to write a narrative which would have 2 threads. So, which is what I do in these books. One is the Delhi thread, where the idea is to humanize and to show these characters, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, Dickie Mountbatten, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, as real flesh and blood characters, which means they are my protagonists. And then I wanted to show the decisions that are being taken in Delhi, what are the repercussions happening in the various places, so Lahore, Hyderabad, and Kashmir. And we can discuss later why these particular cities. So that was a sort of objective I set for myself. And then when I was discussing it with my publisher, he said, oh, so your protagonist in Delhi is Jawahar and Vallabh, and Tiki? And I said, yes. So, because I want people, when they interact with them, to see Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru as a real person. And the person who gets up daily and is struggling with these events, and history is so momentous, it is galloping like a charger, way ahead of
jailed
him.
very often.
And he has to catch up with them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as I said, I've spent 25 years doing that, but the narrative did come together at a point in time. I attended a trauma class. I was trying to deepen my understanding of trauma literature. New York has some wonderful colleges. City University of New York had a wonderful teacher. And when I was attending a class, I came across something which, for me, the penny dropped. And I said, okay, this is what I can use, and I won't spend time on it, but you can look up. It's called critical fabulation. It's basically a strategy where you use a skeleton of hard research, and then you put a flesh of creative imagination on it. And that's the strategy I use to flesh out these characters.
Sounds very much look-up worthy. So this is everybody's post-session homework. There's a lot of women. There's a lot of women characters. I see that you insist that the women have a voice, even though a lot of the narrative and decision making was done by the men.
Yeah, that's deliberate. So as I said, there were two objectives. One was to show the decisions being taken in Delhi and their repercussions on the Aam Aadmi in order. So in a sense, I'm putting the what historians call the subaltern and the elite on the same stage, the political leaders. And two was very consciously, very deliberately show women and their experience of partition. And the reason for that is that in the subcontinent, we celebrate independence, and rightly so. But the cost of independence is partition, and we don't talk about it. We don't talk about it enough. In fact, I believe in the history textbooks in India, currently partition is a paragraph. And the cost of partition was disproportionately borne by women. And it's not that women are these abla nari who were sitting around and facing this. No, women had agency. They were making active choices how to keep their families safe, how to keep the children safe, how to keep the men folk safe, how to keep themselves safe. And so I wanted the focus on women, and also I want people to remember that amidst the loss and sort of the very difficult time of partition, there was love, there was friendship, there was affection, and I want to show all of that as well. And I think women are a fount of that.
Okay. I want to come to you, Anurag. I know that stories of partition are very, very dear to you. You've been collecting them forever and ever. And then you and I had the great good fortune to work on a project called The Parting, which was a play that EnActe produced, which was stories of partition, told 6 stories actually, interwoven stories of love and hate, of compassion and cruelty, of greed and utter generosity, but told across the border from both sides, and really looking at partition from the point of view of the people on either side of that line that Radcliffe drew. So tell us a little bit about how, as a co-author of that play and the dramaturg of that play, how did the idea come, and what was the impetus that brought you to finish the writing of it?
First of all, it was a fantastic collaboration, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but just as an introduction to my journey into partition, I'm a Hindu Punjabi household. My grandparents were displaced due to partition from Sialkot on both sides, and I grew up in an ancestral household, 3 generations living together, at what you would consider today, I did not know at that time, ground zero in Delhi, literally 100 feet away from Jama Masjid, right? So the place I grew up looked over Jama Masjid, and in old Delhi, all the lanes and all the people that were displaced, many of the Punjabis that were displaced who moved in there, and many of the Muslims who left behind were also there. So I grew up in a kind of community where at home I was listening every day to stories from my uncles and aunts and grandfather about uncles who made it and aunts who didn't, and the family members and their stories. And then when I would go out in the Delhi 6 lanes and gullies, where I would find other Muslim people who had survived there and friends and Gilli Danda, and you discover other stories. Okay, that's what happened. So the burning question, which was in my mind, was why? Like, how come? And as a child, you don't have an answer to that because you just start collecting bits and pieces from everyone you hear, and you try to make sense out of it. And I started, even my teen years, started quietly curating anecdotes and stories. Like, here's what my grandmother said, here's my uncle said, here is my friend who was a Muslim said, and what happened to them. So it was just a sense-making, and it became a lifelong passion for me to start curating the stories to make sense of it. Back before even the research that you did, there was a paucity of literature on partition. Like, I read through all the classics of partition written by all the folks who experienced this firsthand, like Manto and Chuptai and Bhisham Sani. Those were classics, Amrita Pritam being a favorite of mine, who wrote about partition. But that was fantastic, but beyond that, the next generation was silent on it. And when I was growing up, couldn't find, and what you were, even today, but what you were given in the official channels was just snippets of highly biased history, where you had to choose, Jinnah was bad, Nehru was good, and you had to just take sides very instantly about all these political figures that didn't make sense till you started researching. So that's kind of the backdrop in which I came about the partition. And then, as chance would have it, when Vinita and I met and we decided that you were quite excited about creating a play around partition and commissioned this project, my co-author Sajan Singh and I decided, okay, how will we go about doing it and writing it? And one of the early choices was not to deliberately bring in any of the political leaders into these stories. Because there is no right and wrong over there, but it was a creative choice to say, can we tell tales of partition from the voice of people from all communities without invoking any of the political leaders? And that turned out to be interesting, because then we had to say, okay, what kind of stories can we tell? And how do we put it together? So I ended up curating stories from multiple sources. Many of those were, I would literally say, ripped from the headlines of 1940s going back. One of the most popular and famous stories of Zainab and Bhuta love story of star-crossed lovers. It was absolutely heartbreaking story that has been made into movies, but we thought it was a true story. We thought we could reinterpret it in the modern context of how star-crossed lovers, one Sikh man, one Muslim woman, and how they get shoved between the two forces of partition. Then we chose a story of a very sad, poignant, humorous story that we got from original research done by Wazira Zamidar. She wrote a book called Long Partition. And there's an anecdote archived in the footnote somewhere around this guy who's a limb fitter, who was like Ghulam Ali, right? And it's almost poignant and funny.
In the army. He was
in the army, and he got co-opted as to fight for Pakistani army because he happened to be in Pakistan at that time. Later on, he was asked to prove the loyalty because he happened to be born on the Indian side, and he couldn't prove it, so he got shoved to India. Then they said, okay, you're coming from Pakistan, highly suspicious. And the whole story of the poor man for 20 years going back and forth, trying to say, you know, I'm just Ghulam Ali. My job is to live.
This is a documented story,
Yeah.
and all of the documents of his shuffling between New India and Pakistan over 22 years.
Choba Turk Singh story, right? It's poignant, funny, bittersweet. Anyway, the long story short, we chose 6 stories that showed the plight of people from all communities, and we put it together into a multimedia play. And it was very important, the point you made, that most of the literature, even at that time, did not showcase the undue burden on violence, on women. Right? I think the first word by Retu Menon did a seminal work on this in a book called Women in Partition, and then later on, even Urvashi Patalia did some great work. So we wanted to consciously make sure that that was the centerpiece, and we ended up doing that by bringing Amrita Pritam's poems, which are very feminist, very talking very closely about the plight of women, and we made that into the cinema.
I want to bring the conversation to a question that we ask ourselves a lot, especially people who are a product of partition, like I am. My father was born and brought up in Lahore. He, at the age of 16, walked across in his chappals, had to rebuild his life. My husband's family, the same story. They were from Sindh, and they had to move across. And so my children and my grandchildren are very much like we are a product of partition, but we don't talk about it enough. But I've seen, since the 70th anniversary of the partition, or maybe the 75th, suddenly there is a lot of interest. Some of it is because the real lived experiences of people, that generation is dying off, and we don't actually have, we are worried that we're going to lose the stories. But in those 70 years, I feel like there was a collective PTSD and people didn't want to talk about it. And so I just love to pose the question to all three of you, why are we talking about it now? And why didn't we talk about it earlier, in your opinion?
I mean, I don't know for everybody, but for myself as a writer, that was something that, there are projects that for me at least, there are projects that are in my mind that one day I will write this topic, any topic, but there has to be the right time for you as the writer to approach it. So I will give the example of a couple of years ago, I wrote this book, Yusuf Azim is Not a Hero, which centers around 9/11. And it is a story within a story about a boy who is seeing the attacks of 9/11 happen versus a boy today who is experiencing. I don't know. I don't like to use the word patriotism for this, but over too much patriotism in their small Texas town as a result of what's been percolating in this country in the last 20-some years after 9/11. And see those connections. I knew from my first interfaith work that I did in 2001 that this was a topic that I wanted to write about, but that book was published in 2020. It took 21 on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. So it took me 20 years to find that story within myself well enough to be able to write. So I don't know why it is that suddenly, I don't know whether, I would not say that it is something that has been not talked about for the last many years. I think that it depends on families and people. Certainly in Pakistan, this is a topic that's often talked about. When I was growing up, you get a group of elderly people together, that's what they want to talk about. It would be like, why are we talking about this? Which is, for me, a question. How do we make sure that our young people continue to see the importance of an event like that?
I'm going to change the question for the other panelists, since this one was so beautifully answered. Thank you, Saadia. Do you think that this appetite to talk about what happened during partition and this understanding that neither side was really at fault, do you think this is the harbinger of something more positive? Because I find in all my travels that when you take an Indian and a Pakistani out of India and Pakistan and you put them together, we find a lot of things in common because we're all part of the same land, and we may have been separated for 70 odd years, but we were joined for 7 millennia before that, and 7 millennia is a little bit longer than 70 years. And if we can do it outside of our countries, where the politics is not bearing down on us so aggressively, do you see a scenario in which the politics might dovetail into the humanity that we are expressing now?
Anurag has a very definitive so I let you go ahead.
It's such a complicated topic. My simple opinion is I'm now not just South Asian, but American. So I think if I draw a parallel, if I may add some parallel, between American and Indian origin and Indian Pakistan origin. American Revolution was seminal for creating this country, and we look back to it as founding a set of principles. Yet it was born with the whole black issue as an unresolved issue, and that became the defining contradiction for the origin of this country. So every generation grapples with that. Every generation starts out with reconciling the founding principles of this country that we all love, and that's why we are here, many of us, right, and pledge allegiance to America. Yet we have to reconcile the fact that the slavery was an evil that has to be solved for. I think India and Pakistan, we had the freedom, both countries, and we revere it, we wanted it desperately from the Britishers after 300 years, but there was a foundational event called partition, right? And you cannot escape it. You cannot have simple answers like, they did it to us, or the people above did it to us. We have to reconcile. Every generation will have to make sense of it. And I think as long as we are having that dialogue, that it's not like quote unquote other people's fault, I think we will discover the humanity. Right? We will discover the humanity if we don't keep poking at it as it's the other people's problem. And just my closing thought is that partition was unlike many other events in one foundational way, which is very easily missed unless you live through it, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it, which is the following. When we talk about, let's say, Holocaust, or what happened in Japan with Hiroshima and many other things, it's easy for us to point out like who did what to whom. Because there is a state, there is a bad guys, and they had the military arm, they had the bombs, or they had the fascist ideology, and there was a state and Gestapo or whatever did it. Whereas sadly in partition, we did it to each other, right? Town by town, neighborhood by neighborhood. There was no British forces shooting people. There was no one side, having a higher ground. I think that's a.
Did we really though? Did we not get set up?
I agree. There is enough blame to go around, so I'm not trying to make that point. My point simply is that it's an uncomfortable truth,
yes.
right?
Yes.
And it's very easy to talk past that
yes.
by saying it was colonialism, it was blah, blah, blah. Whatever the label
But
is.
it's also politically very easy to say the other guy was the bad guy,
yes.
and so we are the good guys. And
both
both countries have that narrative. And sitting in Singapore, what were you thinking, Manreet?
Well, I sat in Singapore for a short while. I just want to, I think this is a complex issue, and every person who has experienced it in some form or the other, personally themselves or their parents or grandparents, has something to bring to the situation. And I can say that, as Anurag said, when I was doing that oral archive, which I did for almost 8 years, I very quickly realized that the people who had seen that event and experienced it were frail, were in their memory was fading, and they would pass away. And so this was my way to grapple with that and hold on to what they had to tell me, unfiltered. And we have to, a lot of times when people recall trauma, it doesn't come in a linear fashion. It's not something which is recalled in a logical way. It's things which are most vivid, which then the mind has lived with and may amplify, and may talk in metaphors. So I had to learn to teach myself to understand what they were saying and comprehend it. And I was struggling all this while with how do I make sense of it. And then there was an elderly Sikh gentleman, he said something. And I'll say it in Punjabi and then translate it in English. And he said, "Puttar kise de haath saaf nahi," which is exactly what Anurag said, that nobody's hands are clean, they're all complicit. Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, maybe not the Parsis and Christians, who are a very small percentage of the population. But Ashish Nandi, who is India's preeminent sociologist, has done a lot of work in the area, I think sums it up very well. He says what we were doing was an exorcism. Which when you take something which is so much a part of you, and I can certainly speak for Punjab, because in Punjab there were no ghettos. There was no कि ये Muslim का मोहल्ला है, ये Hindu का है, और ये Sikh का है. People lived cheek by jowl. Women raised each other's children, like you did. The men would go off to work, and once they had finished cooking, they would sit in the chopal, everybody's, you would braid the other's hair. So people were raising each other's children. And suddenly, you're told that this place is not your home anymore. This is not your community anymore, and you have to flee with whatever you can. And then how do you do it? It's the exorcism. You take that part of you and you have to cast it out of yourself, which is what we did as Indians. And for the longest time, which is what Vinita said, the trauma, the PTSD was so high that it's taken 3 generations to deal with it. But there's always a silver lining, because when I go to India now, I'm so gratified when young people, first year in college, sophomore, my daughter's 8, they come up to me and say, look, I don't care what the politics is, I want to know what happened. And I think that is important. The moment we can tell each other what happened is when we can really have a dialogue. Without the emotion, the passion, the accusations, and all that. And just to put things in perspective, because I come from New York, and New York is the home of the Jewish diaspora, right? Every year we have fabulous literature which comes out who deals with the Holocaust. Memoir, graphic novels, literary fiction. And Partition is our Holocaust. 12 to 15 million people migrated east and west. 2 to 5 million people lost their lives. Where is our reckoning? Where is the art? In whichever form we create it. So this is my call to whoever are the young people out here or people who are energized, that you have a contribution to make. Please, let's engage with this topic, because we cannot allow it to pass, because we cannot allow it to reckon.
I want to be a little bit provocative. I want to be a little bit provocative here, because when I was posting on Facebook about the play that Anurag and I did together called The Parting, there was some people who said, it was a horrific event, it is past, why do we have to scratch the wounds, and why are we bringing it up again? Can we not let it go? Saadia, can we not let it go? What do you think?
No, and that is similar to something that in my book, Dadi says. Not only Dadi to Manur, but her friend, for example, from Vietnam, or other people who are living lives that are concerned with today and now. And she herself wants to be a journalist all about what's going on today and current events. But at some point she realizes that her grandmother is still living in the past in a lot of ways. And that affects her, and then it affects her family. It affects how her grandmother raised her father and how her father raised her. And so how do you just ignore that? I mean, personally, I love history. I'm a big history buff. I love all kinds of historical novels, but also just history in general. And there's so much wealth of even in horrific events that we can find. And at the end of the day, when we read or learn about any horrific event, what we are really learning is everything about the resilience of the human spirit, and about courage, and about how we can still take care of each other, or how we can rise above in the worst of circumstances. So there is that hopeful message that we can still take from there. If we read about partition or anything, Holocaust, any horrible event that happened, but only focus on how many people died, but then not how many people helped each other, or how many people survived and then went on to do great things, I feel like that's wrong. We should do more of that.
Thank you. That was a phenomenal answer. I want to bring in a panelist who is not present here physically. We tried very hard to get her, but she's very much with here. And that panelist would be Veera Hiranandani, who is the product of a Sindhi father and a Jewish mother, and both families experienced the Holocaust and the partition. And she ended up writing a book called The Night Diary, which was followed by a sequel called A Meal and the After. And this is the story, sort of an Anne Frank-esque story of a young girl born of a Muslim mother and a Hindu father who needs to cross the border because they choose to embrace their Hinduism more than because the Muslim mother has passed away and the Hindu family is now ready to accept them. We produced this as a play in partnership with the Children's Theatre of Charlotte. The Children's Theatre of Charlotte is a 75-year-old theatre that has never seen a South Asian on their stage. And this was the first time. Partition Story was the first story that brought a South Asian actor to their stage, and Anurag ended up being the dramaturg, the expert on partition for that play. And Vera says of the play of the book that she wrote it because the Holocaust is constantly talked about, but the partition has more lessons to be learned because we did it to each other. We didn't have someone else do it to us. And so how do you heal from that? How do you come together after you've divided yourself in such a dramatic form? I think we have a couple of minutes left in case somebody wants to address that.
I will say about Vera, I know her, and since all the children's authors, we kind of tend to constantly stumble upon each other at various events. And this was actually also the first time this book won the Night Diary. It won the Newbery Honor, which is in the children's fiction world the top U.S. award that you can get for children's literature, fiction and nonfiction. And this was a shock to a lot of people when it won the Newbery Honor because it was not an American story. It was a historical fiction set in India. And for the first time, I as a writer, I was just starting out when this book came out and had a lot of doubts about my own abilities to write and sell over here. And that made me at least think, okay, people here are willing to hear the story as well. And to have the stamp of Newbery Honor on a book, it kind of gives other people more confidence as well.
Yeah.
That stories of other places and other cultures are also valid and relevant.
I will tell Vera that you were so inspired.
She knows herself. In the Partition Project, the main character, Maha, also reads the Night Diary. We go full circle. She goes to the librarian and says, I need a book about the partition, and the librarian says, I've never heard of it. But there's a book by this author, and here it is. So I told her that, hey, listen, your book's in my book.
You see, this is the way of getting people to come together. We share our stories and we share our literature. And there is a sad footnote, well, I don't know if it's sad, maybe it's just provocative, that the Night Diary has been banned in schools in 6 states in America as of last year because it's a story not about America and it has Muslims and all kinds of weird things, reasons for banning. Which Vera is actually excited by because it makes the book sell, because So I think that's a really good segue into hearing from all of you and what questions you have for all of our panelists. Yes, I'll come to you.
You made the reference, but before you made the reference, I wanted to bring up Vietnam, Germany, and Korea. So what is the relationship between what happened in those countries versus here? And in particular, Vietnam came back together, and Germany also. It's only Korea that's still a problem.
I mean, I don't want to speak to the politics of it. I'm not that well versed. At least in my book, Maha has a best friend who's from Vietnam, and she doesn't know anything about her history of Vietnam. And so they start fighting amongst each other because her friend says, why do you care about something that happened when you were not even alive? And Maha says, why do you not care about something that happened when you were not alive? So it's, that is the extent of, for me at least, the reference. There are so many parallels to be made. I mean, that's why we should read history, because there are parallels over and over and over again.
In fact, Cyprus is still divided, but North Cyprus versus.
Yeah, so Saadia, my question is for you. Why has Pakistan failed to create nationalists? And I'll explain the question. Like, Benazir Bhutto was the head of state, and she doesn't complete her term and she goes to London. And then you got Nawaz Sharif, and same thing. He doesn't complete his term, he goes to London. You got Musharraf, he also leaves his country and goes to London, right? And then you've got the good Pakistani who is Malala, and she's also in London, whereas 40% of the students in Pakistan, I mean, school-going kids in Pakistan are not in school, and the rest are getting a bad education.
Questions. Okay.
So my question.
And I never went to London. Straight to the US.
Sarima, do you want to take that question?
So I don't have a question. But did the panelists read Muhajir Nama by Muhammad Rana? Have you all read Muhajir Nama?
Me? I have not. Oh,
I have not.
He passed away this year, and I wrote what he wrote about the journey of these people. Muhajir ne magari dunya
Can you speak up, please?
Or why don't you stand for mic?
You all will. He passed away
I
earlier
know
this
there's a
year.
question at the back.
It's an Indian poet who wrote about partition, and he said, "मुहाजिर है मगर एक दुनिया छोड़ आए हैं, तुम्हारे पास जितना है मुतना छोड़ आए हैं। कहानी का ये हिस्सा सबसे छुपाया है, कहानी का ये हिस्सा सबसे छुपाया है कि हम मिट्टी के खातिर एक दुनिया छोड़ आए." It goes on and on. Read it; it will be fantastic. I think my grandfather taught me as a person from Partition Lahore that the human story, as you said, wasn't about it. Politicians are turning it. We have to be very careful.
There's a question there.
Not on. By the way, the microphone is not on.
Go ahead. There was a question.
Is it clear? Yeah, it's working now. Thank you. Thank you for this very enriching panel. I really enjoyed hearing from all of you. I'm from the south of India, which was unimpacted by the partition. So as a student,
My book is called Hyderabad. There's a reason.
I'm sorry, I'm from Chennai, which is not Hyderabad. Sorry, I'm from Chennai. No, I said that because I studied the partition in cinema for my master's because I thought, stories. And I was wondering if each of you have a favorite film on the partition, and also because what we call now Bollywood, the Bombay film industry, was the most impacted by the partition, but it took them so many years to directly talk about the partition, right? It was so traumatic. So I was wondering, and I looked at films like Khamosh Pani, Veer Zara. So I would love to know what films that you have on the partition that you recommend or have watched.
But I was going to say Garam Hawa without fail. It's just brilliant film, underappreciated. Thomas as a serial. Yes.
No, I just want to just for the so my husband's a South Indian, and I remember when I got married, my mother-in-law said, no, we don't have any partition story in our house. And that amnesia, all of South India suffers. I mean, please read Hyderabad. Hyderabad acceded to India when India invaded it a year after independence and partition. So we very much have a partition story in the south of India. We have conveniently forgotten.
Chennai is always part
But Hyderabad, if I can just add, yes, it was not Chennai was not part of it, but Hyderabad is not Hyderabad city, or as it was Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, and large parts of Maharashtra and Karnataka. So really the Deccan Valley.
Thank you.
This question is for Saadia. Thank you so much for speaking the truth. One of my questions was how you were able, what were the complexities and challenges of tackling such a heavy, traumatic story for your audience's children as a writer?
I don't know. Maybe I love traumatizing kids. It's not the first time I've written a very heavy, traumatizing story for children. I don't think this would have been my first time doing that. So all my novels, I write for younger kids, like picture books and early readers, and those are what I'm mostly known for because there's so many. But my middle grade or young adult novels are all very heavy topics. A Place at the Table is about racism towards a Muslim and a Muslim girl and a Jewish girl, and how racism takes different forms towards a white person versus a brown person. Yusuf Azim is Not a Hero is about 9/11 and white nationalism and patriotism. So it's not. There's in the Partition Project at one point when Dadi is, so the Partition Project I forgot to mention is a story within a story. So there's Maha's story, but as she is recording her Dadi, you hear Dadi's story as a 12-year-old girl going through partition. And I feel that as a children's writer, to me that is so important to document children's experiences because they look at the same events. You know, the same event that an adult and a child is going through, the child is going to have very different reactions towards it. So at some point she's talking about seeing dead bodies on the ground when her train is going through the land, wherever they're from. They're going from Amritsar to Lahore. And Kim, Maha's best friend, who's also listening, goes, why are you talking about this stuff? And is this appropriate? Because, you know, American children are all about, we hear this word a lot. They hear this word a lot, what's appropriate and what's not. And Dadi goes, well, I went through it, was it appropriate? So, you know, the point is that if children can go through something really terrible, you should be able to write about it in a way that it speaks to them because they will understand and they will appreciate the fact that, okay, I'm not being spoken down to. So I kind of, this is the 4th or 5th such novel that I've written where a lot of hard truths are given to children. But probably about 25% of my readership is grown-ups. So, you know, I feel like I have done a good job in not making it childish, even though it's for kids.
If I can just add to that, one of the highest selling children's series is Harry Potter and deals with really dark themes. I think we'll have time for one more question.
Yeah, I have a story which I want to tell.
The floor is yours. Please take this seat.
No. It's such a sweet story in a way. You know, my chachi's dad, who used to call Nanaji. Nanaji came from, of course, from Lahore, came to Delhi 6. That's where I grew up as well. And of course, this is before, about a year into partition, about a 20-year-old girl, escorted by her brother, finds this man. They've been having a kind of a love affair. She finds him, and this whole family of mine accepts this young woman into the house, and we always call her Choti Nani. And it was such a beautiful relationship with the Badi Nani, Choti Nani, my Nana, and not my real Nana, but my Chachi's dad. But we grew up with each other in Delhi 6, as Anurag put it. You know, it was just an amazing thing. And I just thought I'd share that. It's a very sweet thing happening in the life of all the destruction.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
I want to, before we wrap this panel up, just express my heartfelt gratitude to you, Manreet, for we see partition from the point of view of Delhi and Lahore all the time, but to spend as much effort and as much love on Kashmir and Hyderabad, reading these 2 books really opened my eyes on everything else, you know, and like I said, I feel like I'm a product of partition because my father for 70 years just never stopped saying, "Maine Lahore wapas jana hai, maine Lahore wapas jana hai," you know, that was the land of his birth. But I don't spend as much time thinking about the rest of India. I grew up in Calcutta, so I think about Bangladesh a lot. But Kashmir and Hyderabad were not on my radar, and you put them there, and I have a lot of work to do to find out more. I would encourage everybody to you know, take advantage of the fact that we have the trilogy here and the author here. Saadia's already done her book signing. I don't know if we have room for one more question, but
I would love to ask a question.
Go ahead.
My grandparents faced partition, and I grew up in the Bay Area. I feel like one of the after effects of partition is discrimination within the Indian community, which I oddly enough faced in the Bay Area. So what would your commentary be on discrimination within the Indian community, even if you put like religion aside, like culture, language, state, these things come up where Indians are against Indians. And so any thoughts on that or any advice for folks who are experiencing it or folks who are actually actively doing this in their day-to-day as That's what I would call bad behavior, but I would love your thoughts.
That's a great question. I mean, how do you solve discrimination of any kind in one conversation? That's a lot of work to be done. But I feel like events like these, this is the first time I've ever been on a South Asian festival panel. I'm usually the odd one out talking. I love it, and we should have way more of these. I live in Houston, which has so many Desi people, but we don't really have things like that there. So, the more that conversations like these can be had, and it's just one step in my opinion. It's hard work, and it's going to take time. But thanks for mentioning it, because I honestly had not thought about that. So.
We're going to cut Saadia short because her car is here. Please grab your suitcase and run. But I want to popcorn that question to Manreet. Do you see that in New York among the Indian population?
This will not be a popular answer. I think discrimination is endemic to India, to the subcontinent. There's a very basic logical reason. We are a society which is built on caste. It is baked into the structure of how people relate to each other. Beyond that, I would like to have more sense of what you mean when you say by discrimination. Maybe we can have a conversation outside this. But I think, as Saadia said, I think each one of us has the very active work of treating each other with humanity, with kindness, if not love. And I think literature, art plays a great role, because what it hopefully is generating is empathy. It is helping you walk in the feet of, or whatever, the shoe, the jutti, the heel of that character. And really, once you do that, you realize there is not so much which is different between us, but something which is so similar. So I'm happy to have this conversation, but regretfully, I live in the US now, and I feel the discrimination here abounds. Where it's more color-coded. In India, it's more caste-coded. In Britain, it is more stature and class-coded. That's sort of the human Achilles heel. That's something we deal with. And I think art is the best way to counter that, art in whichever form it can be. Thank you everyone for being here and for being such an amazing audience, and of course the phenomenal panelists, Saadia and myself. And a big thank you to Sala for this brave topic.